My name is Linda Quinn. I'm 62 years old, and right now I'm sitting in the back seat of a 12-year-old Honda Civic, wrapped in the only blanket I have, a threadbare flannel that still smells faintly of my daughter's home. It's been 3 months since Hurricane Ida tore through Houston, and I've lost everything: my small apartment near Bel Air Boulevard, my modest savings, and the life I once knew. I never imagined I'd be sleeping in a car in 2025. But here I am, watching the dawn light spill across a parking lot behind the downtown public library, trying to keep the engine running long enough to stay warm. I remember the morning after the storm. The wind had been relentless, rattling shingles off my roof like loose teeth, and the rain came down in sheets so heavy I thought the sky itself might collapse. I couldn't save my home, even though my insurance paid to rebuild the walls. They didn't cover the life inside them. By the time I crawled out of the mud, I had nothing but the clothes on my back and my daughter's promise. "You can stay with us, Mom, just until you get back on your feet." That promise stretched into 6 weeks of holiday dinners and baby showers I wasn't invited to, and polite texts about "how are you holding up" taped to their refrigerator by my son-in-law Michael. I'd seen the notes: "Energy bills are high. Mom, maybe turn off the AC, and groceries are adding up, let me know." His handwriting was careful, but the message was clear: I was welcome only as long as I was cheap. When I finally left their 3-bedroom townhome in a well-heeled Sugarland neighborhood, I drove my Honda as far as my savings would allow. Every morning, I parked behind that library where Maria Gonzalez, the kind librarian, gave me a nod and never asked why I was there all day. She didn't know I spent hours at the computer terminals, scouring job listings, applying for rental assistance, and learning to accept that my life had changed forever. Maria recognized me by my worn tote bag and the way I always sat at the same desk. No questions, just a smile and a word of encouragement when I nodded in greeting. I needed that kindness more than I realized. Without it, I'd have sunk further into the shame of being homeless at 62. I kept thinking of my mother, who died believing she'd never be forgotten. Sitting here, I wondered if she'd felt the same loneliness, the same invisibility, when life became too much work for the people who loved her. In the gray light of that library hallway, I caught a glimpse of her in me, thin, hollow-cheeked, and exhausted, but still fighting. On that Tuesday morning, the day everything changed, I was juggling 3 tabs on my browser: one for local aid programs, one for entry-level teaching jobs, and one for an online support group of women rebuilding after disaster. I clicked through links on my phone, filling out forms with trembling fingers, when an email notification popped up. The sender was unfamiliar: Harrison Blackwell and Associates, estate attorneys in Pasadena, California. My heart hit my ribs so hard I thought I might have a heart attack. My first thought was that it was spam. My second thought was that, with the way life had been lately, maybe a glitch in the matrix was the most exciting thing to happen in months. I scrolled down expecting the usual "Dear Linda Quinn, congratulations on winning a prize," but instead I read, "We represent the estate of your late Aunt Alice Montgomery. She has bequeathed to you the property located at 1234 Craftsman Avenue, Pasadena, California, along with certain liquid assets and a charitable trust established in your name. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss the inheritance." I sat frozen, the computer screen wobbling in my blurred vision until I thought it might float away. My Aunt Alice, the sister my mother talked about every Christmas when I was a girl. Alice, who ran off to California in the 80s, chasing sunshine, and her life with Patricia, the woman she loved for decades. She'd disappeared from holiday cards and phone calls alike. I'd assumed she was dead lost to the natural drift of families, but she'd remembered me. In that moment, I realized I'd never felt so seen. The rest of the day felt surreal. Maria offered me her office phone so I could call the lawyers no charge, she said with a smile. I used the last of my phone's battery and the free library minutes to arrange a call. The voice on the other end was calm, almost bored, as he read numbers that made me dizzy. The house alone was worth $865,000. The liquid assets totaled over $300,000. After settling debts and taxes, the inheritance would exceed $1 million. At that moment, I pictured my daughter Emily stacking diapers in a nursery she'd painted blush pink. I pictured Michael poring over mortgage rates. I had the power to change their lives. I closed the browser and sat in stunned silence, surrounded by the hum of printers and the rustle of pages. I thought about calling Emily right away, telling her the news, letting her shift from polite pity to genuine excitement. But I didn't. Instead, I did the most radical thing I'd done in months. I drove to a nearby motel, paid cash for 3 nights, and took the hottest shower of my life. Standing under that stream of water, I let the heat thaw the months of winter chill from my bones. And I caught sight of myself in the mirror. The hollow-eyed woman who expected nothing, and a spark of something else, maybe hope, maybe anger. Maybe the quiet recklessness of someone who'd survived too much to back down now. That evening, I sat on the motel bed with my laptop researching Pasadena real estate. The bungalow on Craftsman Avenue had original hardwood floors, built-in bookcases, and a wraparound porch under ancient oak trees. Plenty of work needed, but solid bones. The listing photos showed a front yard of orange trees and a back patio shaded by climbing ivy. It was beautiful. It was home. My phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Mom, hope you're doing okay. We got the house pre-approval closing next week. Baby's almost here." I stared at that message until the screen went dark, then placed the phone face down. She hoped I was doing okay. While I slept in a car, while she built her perfect life around me. The next morning, I drove back to the library, parked in my usual spot, and nodded to Maria. She asked no questions about the change in my clothes or the new confidence in my stride. I spent the next hour drafting an email to Harrison Blackwell and Associates arranging a meeting. My fingers flew over the keys, more certain with each sentence. By the time I left, I had a plane ticket to LAX in my inbox. The same money I'd been hoarding for a security deposit, I used to buy the ticket, my own little dragon's hoard. I packed my belongings into 2 grocery bags, a few changes of clothes, my mother's quilt, and the threadbare flannel that had kept me alive. I drove past Emily's house on my way to the airport, a modest 2-story colonial with a manicured lawn and toys scattered across the yard. Michael's pickup sat in the driveway. I sat in the car across the street, engine running, watching the curtains flutter. Part of me wanted to knock on the door and tell them about the inheritance, but something had shifted inside me. I'd learned that love could be conditional, and family could turn you away when you most needed them. I put the car in drive and headed for the airport. At LAX, I stepped off the shuttle into the warm California sun and felt a weight lift from my shoulders. A car service was waiting. Pedro White, a driver born and raised in LA, greeted me in the lobby. He asked if it was my first time in California. "First time in 40 years, I replied, watching palm trees flash by. "What brings you back?" he asked. "Inheritance," I said, and the word felt foreign on my tongue. But Pedro nodded, as if he understood exactly what I meant. "Funny how family works," he said. "Those you count on disappoint you. The ones you forget save your life." I didn't know what lay ahead when the Craftsman bungalow came into view, a 1920s home with weathered green shingles and a porch wide enough for a swing. I slid out of the car, heart pounding, and used the key I'd been mailed to open the gate. The air smelled of lavender and jasmine, and the boards under my feet creaked like an old friend greeting me home. That evening, standing on the porch, I called Emily. "Mom," she said, surprise and relief tangled in her voice. "I'm in California," I said. "I inherited Aunt Alice's house." Silence. "Then, how much did you get?" she asked. "Enough," I said. "I'm thinking of staying." Another pause. "We can help you," Emily said finally. "We can make room." I hung up before she could say more. The sun dipped behind the San Gabriel Mountains, and as the sky bled into shades of gold and rose, I realized I was exactly where I needed to be. My mother's quilt lay across the porch railing, catching the last of the light. I wrapped it around my shoulders and stepped inside, locking the front door behind me with my new keys. I woke before dawn the next day, brewed coffee in Aunt Alice's kitchen, and listened to the wind rustle through the orange trees. There would be a confrontation soon. Emily and Michael would fly out this weekend, expecting to find the same mother they'd pushed aside. But I wasn't the same woman who'd slept in her car waiting for pity. I was someone who had a home, choices, and the power to define her own worth. Outside, the mailbox groaned with yesterday's mail. Among the envelopes was a thin manila folder with my name stamped on the front. I opened it and found an invitation, a small gathering of neighbors in the front yard to welcome me. I set down my coffee and stepped out onto the porch, the quilt slipping from my shoulders like a silent announcement. I hadn't even met my neighbors yet, but I already felt the promise of something new, a community that saw me as more than an inconvenience, a chance to rebuild my life on my own terms. Then my phone buzzed. A second email from Harrison Blackwell & Associates. Please review the attached provisional copy of your aunt's will, including certain special bequests. My heart thundered as I clicked open the PDF attachments, and that's when I saw it, a handwritten note in the margins in Aunt Alice's own looping script. For Linda May, you build the life I never could. My breath caught. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain: I was no longer the woman who accepted scraps of affection. I was home, and the real story was just beginning. I stepped through the front door and paused, letting my senses catch up. The scent of lavender still lingered in the air, mixed with the faint sweetness of orange blossoms drifting in from the backyard. My boots clicked on the original hardwood floors, scraped and faded, but somehow holding decades of stories in every groove. I carried the cardboard box of my few belongings. My mother's faded quilt, the threadbare flannel that had been my blanket for too long, and a small wooden music box I'd found tucked behind a loose floorboard in the bedroom. The box was simple, rough pine stained dark with delicate carvings of vines curling across the lid. When I wound the key, a tinkling lullaby played something soft and melancholy. I hadn't realized till then that this was Alice's gift, a reminder that beauty could come from hardship. I set it on the built-in bookcase by the window, where afternoon light landed and the melody echoed through the room, filling the quiet like a promise. I dropped onto the edge of the mattress in the spare bedroom, Alice's bedroom, I guessed. Sheets smelled like soap and jasmine. My chest tightened as I pulled the quilt across my lap, feeling my mother's hands stitching every square. That quilt had survived the flood. I'd found it soaked and dirty, draped over a lawn chair in my old backyard. It was the only family heirloom I'd saved, and here in this house that wasn't really mine yet, it felt like the bridge between my past and this new life. I closed my eyes and let the melody of the music box wash over me, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like a ghost haunting my own life. But the moment of peace didn't last. My phone buzzed a calendar alert for 3:00 p.m. Call Harrison Blackwell and a sock. I stared at it, heart pounding. I'd promised myself I wouldn't get swept up again by other people's agendas, especially not lawyers. Still, I wound the box one more time and placed it in my pocket, then grabbed my keys and headed out to the car. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I dialed. On the line was a polite voice, reminding me that the preliminary probate hearing was scheduled for next Tuesday, and that a representative from the decedent's son, Alice's only surviving nephew, might appear to contest the will. The voice was clinical, but I heard the unspoken accusation, "You're a 62-year-old stranger claiming $1 million inheritance." I closed my eyes and took a breath, letting the humidity of Pasadena midday press through the open windows. "I'll be there," I said quietly. "Thank you." And I hung up, feeling the buzz of risk flare through me. I'd never confronted a court in my life. Now I'd defend my aunt's final wishes, and maybe my own. I backed the car out of the driveway, the rattling of the box music echoing in my coat pocket, and drove toward the local cafe where I'd agreed to meet Marcus Hill. Marcus was waiting on the patio under a red umbrella. He stood when I pulled up, tall, lean, with silver-threaded hair and eyes that flickered like candlelight. He handed me a to-go cup of black coffee without sugar. "They didn't make any just for me," he joked, and we walked inside to a quiet corner. "Linda," he said, pronouncing my name just like Alice used to in her old letters. "I'm glad you're here." My aunt trusted me with more than just the property. He passed me an envelope sealed with dark wax, bearing an entwined A+P Alice and Patricia's initials. "I thought you might need this." Inside were faded photographs of Alice standing beside Patricia in the backyard of this very bungalow, planting a camellia bush. There was also a folded piece of stationery with a sketch of the treehouse Alice and Patricia had built for neighborhood kids, a symbol of the community they nurtured. And beneath that, instructions: set up the Phoenix Grove Scholarship Fund $250K initial deposit to support women rebuilding after loss. I felt a rush of warmth, imagining Alice's careful planning. But then a spike of worry. $250,000 at once was no small commitment. The trust documents I'd glanced at mentioned a minimum disbursement period that I'd barely understood. Was I ready to make such a choice? Marcus watched me, his expression patient. She wanted you to use this money to help women like herself, strong, resilient, but sometimes invisible. I know it's a lot, but she believed in you. I closed the envelope, folding my fingers around the papers as if they were a lifeline. I'll do it, I said. I'll make it her legacy. The next morning, I stood outside City Hall, the scholarship papers tucked under my arm. Heat shimmered off the concrete plaza, where a small fountain trickled, and a line of aging palms swayed against the blue sky. I'd expected a quick signature and a press release. Instead, I found myself in a bland office behind a Women's Grants Division sign, facing a clerk who peered at my stack of documents. She flipped through spreadsheets and legal texts, her pen tapping impatiently. "This initial endowment is good," she said finally. Eyebrows raised. "But you'll need an administrator and an annual audit report. Do you have experience managing nonprofit funds?" My throat tightened. I remembered all the nights I'd fallen asleep, listening to library security guards whisper that I shouldn't be there anymore. I swallowed and met her gaze. "No, but I know how to learn," I said. "And I'll hire someone with the expertise." She stared for a moment, doubt maybe in her eyes, but then she nodded, stamping the papers. "All right, we'll get you on the calendar for orientation. Good luck, Ms. Quinn." I exhaled so hard my chest ached. Outside, the fountain's water slipped over the stone, relentless and steady, like life moving forward whether I was ready or not. On the drive back, I passed a row of small storefronts, a hardware supply where Alex and Gwen had done repair estimates, a community center advertising a support group for disaster survivors, and a bookstore with a sign that read, "Late Bloomers Book Club, Thursdays 7 p.m. The engine hummed as I sat at the light, and I thought about the risk I'd just taken. Establishing the scholarship was more than rote paperwork. It was my declaration that I was capable, valuable, and not defined by age or circumstance. I pulled into the hardware store parking lot and found Alex under the awning, holding a bundle of paint swatches. He looked up and waved me over. "I heard about the scholarship fund," he said, handing me a coffee. "I think Aunt Alice would be proud. I also heard there's a crack in the north wall you might want to check before the next rain." He unfolded a loose sheet with his scrawled notes, measurements, materials needed, estimated cost. He added casually, "By the way, you should inspect the basement door lock." Alice installed a deadbolt there. She was always secretive about the old sewing room. My pulse quickened. The sewing room, a place I hadn't even dared explore yet, was said to hold artifacts from Alice's life in the early years before she and Patricia remodeled. For a moment, I hesitated, picturing the basement doors peeling paint and heavy hinges. Then I nodded. "Let's get to it," I said. He smiled, and I realized this was more than a repair job. It was the next step in owning this place, in reclaiming my future. That evening, tools in hand, I crouched in the half-light of the basement doorway. Dust motes danced in the narrow beam of my flashlight. I fumbled with the deadbolt key, my fingers slick with sweat. The lock clicked open, and I swung the door inward to reveal a small room lined with shelves. There, beneath a layer of dust and cobwebs, lay rows of glass jars filled with sewing buttons, stacks of handwritten journals, and a framed photograph of Alice and Patricia wearing matching sun hats, arms around each other. On a low table sat a clay birdhouse painted in bright pastel colors with the inscription, "Home is where we bloom." My chest tightened. Every scrap of Alice's life was here, a testament to the love she and Patricia had cultivated, to the choices they'd made together when society still whispered disapproval. I lifted a journal and opened to the first page, "To Linda who needs this more than anyone I know." The handwriting was familiar, careful flow swing, and the pages that followed chronicled Alice's journey as a woman in love, an educator, a philanthropist, carving out her own path. Reading her words, I felt tears burn behind my eyes. She had faced prejudice, legal threats, and heartbreak, yet she built a life that celebrated authenticity. My own struggles, sleeping in a car, relying on charity, doubting my worth, felt small in comparison. I realized then that owning this house was only half the gift. The other half was her story urging me to stand tall. I carried the journal upstairs and placed it next to the music box. The lullaby started again, soft and insistent. I wrapped the mother's quilt around my shoulders and sat on the porch steps as dusk settled the sky, shifting from gold to pink. A gentle breeze rustled the orange leaves, and I reflected on everything I'd done in the past 24 hours, claiming the inheritance, meeting resistance at City Hall, forging ahead with repairs, and uncovering Alice's secret history. I felt stronger than I had in years, not because I had money, but because I knew my own capacity to endure and create. Still, a knot of anxiety tightened as I recalled the court hearing notice and the nephew's possible challenge. And then there was Emily and Michael coming this weekend, expecting the same mother who once slept in her car. Would they respect my boundaries? Would they see me as I'd become? A notification chimed on my phone, a calendar invite from Emily visiting mom, sat 10 a.m. I stared at it, the dusk shadows deepening around me. My heart raced. I could feel the cross-currents of family obligation and self-preservation colliding inside me. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, the scent of jasmine calming me. No matter what happened, I knew I had one choice to protect this life I was building, just as Alice had taught me. Because in the end, home wasn't just where you slept, it was where you bloomed. And tomorrow, under the bright Pasadena sun, I would face my past and choose my future. But was I ready? The porch swing creaked as I stood, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. I let it out slowly, turning toward the darkened windows of the house that had become mine. Whatever came next, I would meet it head-on because I deserved nothing less. And as the night slipped over Pasadena, I waited, listening for the sound of tires on gravel, the first note of the family reckoning to come. Saturday morning came with a soft California light that slipped between the orange trees, painting the porch in pale gold. My heart was drumming in my chest long before I heard the engine rumble on the gravel driveway. I'd stood by the front window for what felt like hours, watching the clock inch toward 10 huir. Every minute stretched me thinner, a tightrope walker balancing between the old me, grateful, apologetic, willing to be small, and the new me, certain, proud, unwilling to retreat. When the rental car finally eased to a stop, I swallowed hard, smoothing my navy blue dress and checking the pearl earrings Alice had left in her jewelry box. They were small, simple, but they felt like armor now. I clipped the quilt around my shoulders like a banner and stepped onto the porch. Emily hopped out first, her phone in one hand and a tote bag in the other. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, and her eyes glittered with expectation, like she already knew this visit would end the way she wanted. Michael followed, briefcase, swinging, his expression polite but guarded. They both paused on the bottom step as I opened the gate. Neither moved to hug me. I offered a small smile. "Good morning," I said, my voice steady. "Welcome to my home." Emily's smile flickered just enough to see confusion, and Michael gave me a polite nod. "Mom," Emily said, her tone clipped. "We're so glad you could pick us up." As we walked to the car, I felt the quilt slipping from my shoulders, so I tightened it around me, letting the weight remind me that I belonged here. The rental car's interior smelled faintly of new leather and air freshener, unlike the Honda Civic, where I'd made a bed in the back seat. I slid into the driver's seat and glanced at Emily in the passenger seat. "Where to?" I asked. Michael opened the passenger door behind her. "We thought we'd give you a little tour," Emily said. "Show you the neighborhood you've inherited." Her words sounded rehearsed, like she'd practiced them in front of the bathroom mirror. But I let her think she was in charge for now. We drove down Craftsman Avenue, past houses with fresh paint and manicured lawns. Emily pointed out the community center, the Friday night farmers market, the dog park, where she imagined Grandma Linda walking Emma and the new baby. Michael added commentary on property values and school districts, his voice even calculating. I listened, nodding occasionally, watching their reflections in the side mirrors. I felt a twist of anger here. They were pretending to care about my well-being when they'd left me sleeping in a car for 3 months. But I kept my tone neutral. "It's all nice," I said, "but I have other plans for this place too." They had both turned to look at me. Emily's eyebrows shot up. "Other plans," she echoed. Michael inhaled sharply, as though I'd startled him. "Mom, you said you were just settling in," Emily said, her voice low. "We thought you were going to sell the house and move back home," Michael added. His perfectly tailored suit crinkled as he shifted in his seat. I took a breath and raised one hand as we approached a stop sign. The quilt slipped, so I pulled it back up the fabric, brushing my cheek. "That's not the story anymore," I said softly. "I'm making this my home." Silence stretched between us, punctuated only by the ticking of the turn signal. The car behind us honked lightly, but we were in our own bubble now. Emily's face drained of color. She glanced at Michael, and I saw the same calculation in his eyes, figuring out how much I'd changed and whether they could still bend me back. "But Mom," Emily said, voice trembling. "What about Emma? What about the new baby? We need you." She placed her hand on her growing belly. A gesture that once would have made my heart bloom. Instead, I felt steel settle in my spine. "I love Emma," I said. "I will always be her grandmother, but not under your conditions." I felt the words settle on them like a winter coat. "You wanted help with the down payment. You wanted me to finance your forever home. That's your plan, not mine." Michael's jaw clenched. "This is ridiculous," as he said. "You're throwing away your family over money." I glanced at my hands on the wheel, the quilt slipping again. I pulled it tighter, feeling the weight and warmth. "It's not about money," I said. "It's about dignity." I remembered Alice's journal entries, how she wrote about choosing life on her own terms, refusing pressure from her siblings to be sensible. I felt her presence beside me, urging me on. "I deserve to live where I choose," I said. "I deserve respect." They were quiet as I guided the car to the community center parking lot, the engine ticking as it cooled. The farmer's market was in full swing, stalls of fresh produce bakers selling sourdough loaves, children chasing bubbles. I parked under a shade tree and turned off the engine. The quilt slipped to my knees and I let it fall. Emily stared at me, her bright red nails tapping her bag. Michael flicked open his briefcase looking for documents. I opened my door. "We could sit at the market," I suggested, nodding toward the bustle. "Grab a coffee talk." Emily hesitated. I saw the debate flicker across her face, convenience versus confrontation. Finally, she nodded. "Okay," she said. "We'll do that." Michael closed his briefcase with a snap. We walked toward the stalls, the quilt pooling around my ankles. I felt every eye on us, the curious glances of neighbors, the familiarity of new community. As we queued for coffee, I watched Emily's expression shift from expectation to something like uncertainty. Michael stood behind her, arms crossed, scanning the market. I felt powerful, rooted like the camellia bush Alice and Patricia had planted decades ago, thriving in this soil. As I reached the front of the line, I ordered 3 coffees black for me with 2 sugars, latte for Emily, Americano for Michael. I carried the tray to a picnic table shaded by a striped umbrella. We sat facing one another, cups steaming between us. For a moment, we just breathed the air, the scent of fresh cilantro from a salsa stand, the hum of conversation, the laughter of children. My heart slowed, anchored by the symphony of ordinary life. Then Emily spoke. "Mom," she said softly, "we want you to be safe, but we also want our family back. We thought," her voice cracked, "we thought this would fix everything." I felt a pang, not pity, but recognition. She truly believed that money could heal the wounds she helped inflict. "Fix what?" I asked, voice gentle but resolute. She blinked back tears. "Us," she said. "Our family." Michael shifted uncomfortably. I took a slow sip of coffee. Feeling bitterness and warmth swirl together on my tongue. "Family isn't a transaction," I said. "You can't buy my loyalty with funds or fireplaces or brownies at the bake sale." I paused, letting the words settle. He opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. "I'm not the same person you left behind. I'm the woman Alice believed I could be." Emily's shoulders slumped. Michael's face darkened. I folded my hands around the mug, the quilt's weight at my feet, a reminder of everything I'd reclaimed. "I want to help," I said at last, "but on my terms. I have a scholarship to set up repairs to finish community to build, and I will not sign away my dignity for a mortgage payment." Silence followed thick as syrup. Then Michael spoke, voice low. "You're making a big mistake." I looked at him, seeing the younger man who once scoffed at my clothing and my savings. Maybe I said, but if I don't stand for myself, I'll lose more than money. I downed the rest of my coffee and slid off the bench. Emily stood, eyes red. "So that's it," she whispered. "You're done with us." I felt tears prick my own eyes, not of sorrow, but of clarity. I'm done with anyone who doesn't see me as more than a bank account or a burden. I turned toward the stalls, the hum of life flowing around me, and started to walk away. Their feet shuffled behind me, hesitant. As I neared the exit, I paused and looked back once. Emily's face was streaked with tears. Michael's eyes were hard with indignation. Then I faced forward and stepped into the sunlight, leaving them behind under the striped umbrella. The quilt now folded neatly in my arms, like a silent victory. I didn't look back again. That afternoon, I returned home alone, the front porch silent but welcoming. I leaned the quilt against the music box, wound it once more, and let the lullaby remind me that home was not where you were tolerated, it was where you were celebrated. Outside, the camellia bush was in bloom, its red petals bright against the green leaves. I knelt beside it, running my fingers along the soft petals, feeling the thorns below. Life was fragile, but also resilient. I stood and went inside, locking the deadbolt behind me. There would be other battles, court dates, contractors' restless nights, but I was ready. Because I had learned that the greatest risk was not standing up for yourself. And as the camellia blossoms whispered in the breeze, I knew that tomorrow would bring a new dawn, and I would meet it on my own terms. Saturday dawned humid and bright, and I woke before the sun fully broke over the San Gabriel foothills, the first light glancing off the tops of the orange trees like a promise. I dressed in the same navy dress I'd worn for Emily and Michael's visit. It made me feel solid, unshakable, and clipped the pearls into my ears. In my bag, I stowed Alice's journal, the scholarship paperwork, and a folded copy of the will with my aunt's handwritten margin note. For Linda May, you build the life I never could. My heart thudded with purpose as I locked the front door, the click of the deadbolt echoing like a starting gun. Today was the preliminary probate hearing. Today I would face my cousin James, the only surviving Montgomery nephew, who'd filed to contest Alice's will. He insisted I was unfit, too old, too inexperienced to manage a $250,000 to $1,000 scholarship fund and a house worth close to $1 million. He'd argued that the property should be sold and the proceeds split. But I knew better. I'd seen Alice's plan in black and white, her careful instructions to help women like herself, suddenly displaced, unmoored, invisible. I'd pledged to honor that intent. The courthouse air was cool and perfumed with polished floors. I paused in the lobby, the music box tucked under my arm, its lullaby melody playing quietly inside my coat. A security guard gave me a nod, probably recognizing me from last week when I'd registered as a claimant. I clutched my papers, stepping into the courtroom where sunlight streamed through tall windows onto rows of wooden benches. My lawyer, Ms. Chu, motioned me to the front row. She looked at me with steady eyes and whispered, "Ready?" I managed a small smile. "Let's do this." James entered in a dark suit that hung off his shoulders like armor. His jaw was set, and he carried folders bulging with affidavits. He nodded curtly at me on his way to his table. I returned the nod, no resentment, only resolve. The bailiff called the session to order, and Judge Ramirez peered down from his bench brows, knitted in mild impatience. "Ms. Quinn," he said, "Mr. Montgomery has filed to set aside the trust on grounds of undue influence and lack of capacity." Counsel Ms. Chu stood and delivered my opening, a calm, precise statement of Alice's sound mind when drafting the will, backed by medical records and witness testimony, including my own affidavit and those of longtime friends like Marcus Hill and Sharon Clayton from Ohio, who'd spoken to Aunt Alice's clarity and purpose. On the projector behind us flicked images of Alice and Patricia planting that camellia bush decades ago, and the sketch of the treehouse they built for neighborhood children, symbols of their intention to nurture community, not cash out their legacy. Then it was James's turn. He rose and read from a letter he claimed to be from Aunt Alice's former physician, alleging memory lapses in her final year. His voice quavered theatrically as he described moments of confusion. I felt a hot surge of anger burn behind my ribs. I knew Alice had kept meticulous journals through those years, vivid narratives of her daily work on the scholarship fund and her deep love for Patricia. When his attorney questioned the authenticity of the physician's letter, James shifted and mumbled something about having lost the original, refusing to produce it. The courtroom murmured. Judge Ramirez frowned. Ms. Chu then stood again, opening Alice's journal to an entry dated just 3 months before her death. Set aside funds today for Phoenix Grove Endowment. Linda will know exactly what to do. The page was smudged with ink, a tear in the margin evidence of Alice's resolve. I watched James's face go pale. His attorney tried to interject, but the judge silenced him with a nod. The court will require an in-person affidavit from Dr. Sato, Judge Ramirez said. And in the absence of that, this contest is without merit. Motion to dismiss is granted. I exhaled so sharply, I feared the judge might glare, but instead, he leaned back and said, "Congratulations, Ms. Quinn. You may proceed with probate as drafted." Relief pulsed through me like a wave, and I pressed my hand to my chest, hearing my own heartbeat ring in my ears. James gathered his folders and stalked out without a word. His attorney tucked his chin and muttered apologies. I felt a flicker of pity for him, a man who saw family as property to be divided rather than bonds to be honored. I stood and nodded respectfully to Judge Ramirez, who gave me a small, almost approving lift of his chin. I slipped out of the courtroom, Ms. Chu at my side, and felt the warmth of sunlight and rain-blown jasmine outside the doors. That afternoon, I returned home and found Maria Gonzalez waiting in the front yard holding a clipboard. She wore a bright yellow sundress and smiled wide enough to light up the porch. "They called me true to form, said I ought to testify about your aunt's clarity," she said, slipping me a bottle of water. "Here, take this." I hugged her, tears of gratitude stinging my eyes. Alex joined us with a wheelbarrow full of freshly planted saplings and red camellia cuttings. "I figured we'd start the Phoenix Grove ceremony today," he said, grinning. "Let's get these in the ground while the soil's still cool." The Phoenix Grove Scholarship Fund's first community event, planting a grove of trees to mark the scholarship's launch. I felt my chest lift. This was more than symbolism. It was action rooted in living earth. We knelt together in the shade of my front yard, digging holes in the loamy soil. Neighbors drifted by: Anna from the book club with her notebooks, Lloyd from the hardware store with a tray of lemonade, and 2 Pasadena high school girls volunteering for the scholarship committee. Each planted a sapling, a young oak, a lemon tree, a Japanese maple. When it was my turn, I crouched beside a Camellia japonica, cutting the same species Alice and Patricia had planted 50 years ago. I brushed dirt around its base, whispering, "For the women who thought they had no roots." As I stood, the gathered crowd clapped softly, and I realized I was shaking not with fear, but with something like triumph. That night, I sat on the porch steps beneath the new Grove Maria on one side and Alex on the other, sipping iced tea. The lantern Alex had strung overhead cast warm circles of light. I traced the quilt's pattern with my fingertips and wound the music box key, once letting the lullaby drift through the night. Someone walked by on the sidewalk. Sharon's daughter, on her way home from a church potluck, called out a greeting, and I realized how woven into this community I'd become in just a week. Yet as the tune ended, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number: "Nice ceremony. Ms. Quinn, shame about the camellia bush." I peered at the shadows beyond the porch light. I hadn't noticed anything amiss by the bush this morning. I'd been too full of hope. My chest tightened. Someone wanted to rattle me. The camellia was sacred, a living link to Alice and Patricia's love. I stood and crossed the porch to check. Under the red-green leaves, one stem was snapped clean off, lying wilted on the ground. My heart sank a cold weight, replacing the warmth of the evening. I knelt, gathering the broken branch in my hand, delicate, half-bloomed, a symbol of violence against legacy. I looked up at the dark outline of my house, its windows dusky mirrors. In that moment, I knew the real battle was only beginning, not just against family greed, but against anyone who believed a woman of my age and means was an easy target. I stood, the broken branch clenched in my fist, and felt a fierce determination flash through me. They could break a branch, but they wouldn't break my spirit. And as the porch light flickered overhead, I realized I had one choice to protect this home, this life, no matter what threat came next. Tomorrow would test me again. A low wind rustled the leaves above, as if answering with a whisper, "You belong here." And I believed it. I woke before dawn again, the cool air filtering through the cracked window and carrying the faint scent of jasmine from the garden. My bones still ached from crouching over the broken camellia, but I didn't hesitate. I dressed quickly in jeans and a comfortable blouse, clipped on my small pearl studs, and tucked Alice's journal and the music box into my tote. I carried my grandmother's quilt draped over one arm and slipped out the gate before the neighborhood stirred. The first thing I did was kneel beside the ruined bush under the orange tree canopy. The clean break of that single stem felt like a wound to my gut. I ran my fingers along the jagged edge and pressed a finger to the sap-slick wood, tasting its bitterness. Someone had come in the night, reached past the new saplings, and broken it off with purpose. I snapped a photo with my phone, careful to catch the angle of the light, so I'd have accurate evidence. The soil around the base was disturbed small footprints in the damp earth, likely size 6 or 7, pointed toward the west side gate. I traced them with my fingertip and felt anger coil in my chest, but also a fierce clarity I wouldn't be driven out or intimidated. Not now, not ever. I walked to the driveway where Alex's old truck was parked and left a voicemail. "Hey Alex, it's Linda. There's been an incident with the camellia. I need you to come over and check for damage, and maybe set up one of those night vision trail cams you mentioned. Call me back." I drove to Maria's house next. She lived 2 blocks away on a quiet street lined with jacarandas. She was already watering her front yard when I pulled up. I hopped out and handed her a photo of the broken branch. "Morning, honey," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I'm so sorry. I saw some footprints near your gate earlier, but I couldn't tell who it was. Let me make you some tea, and then I'll walk over with you to inspect the rest." Together, we returned to my porch, Maria bending down to examine the soil. "This is fresh," she said, tapping the dirt with her gardening trowel. "Maybe early hours before sunrise." She straightened and looked at me. "Do you have any idea who'd want to do this?" I shook my head. James was my first thought. My cousin contesting the will. But I can't prove he was here. I want to cover all angles. Maria nodded, wrapping a handkerchief around her spray bottle. "I'll ask around discreetly. No fear, but we'll keep eyes open." I felt gratitude bloom for her quiet support. It was one thing to own this house, another to belong to its people. Back home, I found Alex waiting by the gate, motion sensor cameras strapped in his arms and a toolbox in the back seat of his truck. He grinned. "Heard you had a camellia casualty. Ready to turn your yard into Fort Knox." I managed a small laugh and handed him the photo. "I want evidence, Alex. Whoever did this needs to know I'm not afraid." He nodded and set to work mounting a camera high in a gutter, hiding another behind the bird bath, and reinforcing the basement lock he'd installed earlier. As he drilled, I stood nearby with the quilt folded in my arms, feeling the weight of home settle on my shoulders. By the time the sun was fully up, the cameras were in place, wires tucked into gutters, and stakes hammered into flower beds. Alex wiped his brow. "That'll catch anyone who creeps around here after dark. You'll have footage by morning." He offered me a cold bottle of water. I accepted it, letting the cool plastic soothe my fingers. "Thank you," I said. "Really?" He nodded and climbed into his truck, leaving me alone with the humming street. I spent the afternoon preparing for a meeting I'd arranged with James at a coffee shop halfway between Pasadena and his own estate. I arrived early, clutching a notebook and a pen. I sipped black coffee and watched the door until he strolled in slim-fit suit Gucci loafers, that same tight-lipped expression. He spotted me and slid into the booth opposite. Without preamble, he said, "I heard about your little ceremony. I suppose it was your idea to publicly shame me." I took a breath. "James, I know you sued to contest the will. I'm giving you a chance to explain yourself before we escalate this," he smirked. "Explain myself." "You inherited $1 million. Some people might think that's enough explanation for a good fight." I pressed my lips together. "I'd like to know if you had anything to do with the camellia." He blinked, eyes narrowing. "Why would I vandalize my own aunt's garden? That makes no sense." I pulled out the photo of the broken branch. "These footprints by the gate match the size you wear. You were in town late last night." He leaned back, folding his arms. I transported some furniture for the sale. My people were here dismantling the mahogany bookcase. Must have been a laborer that dropped it. His voice was flat, but I saw a flicker of uncertainty. Except I haven't signed any sale papers, I said, and no movers were authorized. He paused, then said, fine. Maybe it was someone else. I'm busy, Linda. Let's keep this civil. He stood, dropped a crisp 20 on the table for his coffee, and walked away. I watched him go stomach churning with suspicion. He hadn't denied being here. He'd just deflected. I folded the photo and tucked it into my jacket pocket, feeling the cold press of truth. If James wouldn't admit it, I'd have to wait for camera footage. And until then, I'd treat him as a threat. That night, I scrolled through the footage from the cameras, hours of silent trees and empty driveways, until at 2:10 a.m., the infrared light caught a figure slipping through the side gate. The shape was tall, slender, wearing loafers or slip-on shoes, moving with confident ease. The camera stuttered as he passed out of frame, then caught him bending toward the camellia before standing and retreating. There was no doubt the silhouette matched James's broad shoulders and the shape of his jacket. I paused the video and stared at the screen, heart pounding. I saved the clip to my phone and uploaded it to a secure folder. My pulse raced, not from fear, but from adrenaline evidence in hand. I felt empowered. Tomorrow, I would take this to the county sheriff. But first, I needed to tell the community. I pulled on my sneakers and headed out, taking the long way around the block to clear my head. Streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement, and I thought of Alice and Patricia, who faced prejudice and intimidation too. They didn't cower, they fought back. I would too. The next morning at the farmer's market, where we'd sat just days before I held a small press conference under the striped umbrella. Word had spread and neighbors gathered with steaming coffee cups and supportive smiles. I introduced myself as the beneficiary of Alice's estate and announced the Phoenix Grove Scholarship Fund's first cohort of applicants, women over 50, rebuilding after loss. Then I revealed the footage on my phone, projected it onto a makeshift screen Alex had rigged between two stalls. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the night vision clip played James's silhouette striding across the lawn. I felt a flush of vindication, my community standing behind me, refusing to ignore wrongdoing. After the viewing, I spoke. This house and garden are not just mine. They belong to all of us who believe in second chances, who honor legacies rather than destroy them. The scholarship will thrive, and this grove will bloom because we stand together. The applause was warm and real, and I caught Maria wiping tears from her eyes. Even Anna from the book club dabbed at her cheeks with a tissue. I felt the quilt's weight on my shoulders, once more a mantle of belonging. But as I stepped down, I saw two figures at the edge of the crowd. Emily and Michael standing stiffly, arms crossed. Emily's eyes were red-rimmed, and Michael's jaw was tight. Before I could approach them, Emily spoke loud enough for the nearest rows to hear. You publicly humiliated your own family. Mom, we tried to help you. A hush fell. I met her gaze steady. Family, I said, voice cutting through the quiet, doesn't break branches and hide in the dark. Michael's face paled, and he shook his head. Emily's lip quivered, but she didn't step forward. I turned back to the crowd. Thank you, everyone, I said. Let's plant the next camellia. As the community moved around me, gathering shovels and seedlings, I took a breath, and my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number read, Niche show today, but be careful what you seed, you never know what might sprout. I looked up to see the crowd leaning in around me, smiling and curious, unaware that a new threat had just been sown. My heart pounded as I slipped the phone into my pocket. I had faced down one enemy, but now the soil was richer for danger. I folded the quilt tighter around my elbows, feeling its warmth, and stepped toward the next planting station. Because if life taught me anything, it was that growth came from risk, and I was ready to bloom again, no matter what waited beneath the surface. I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating against the nightstand, 3 missed calls from Sheriff Ramirez's office. My heart lurched before I even looked at the screen. I tossed aside the quilt, swung my legs over the side of the bed, and reached for my robe keys, jangling in my pocket, along with the music box key and Alice's journal tucked safely beneath my arm. Outside, a low gray light seeped through the curtains, promising another hot Pasadena morning. I grabbed my coffee mug, still half cold from last night, filled it at the kitchen sink, and bolted it down. Then I unlocked the front door and stepped onto the porch, the air already thick with the scent of orange blossoms and freshly turned soil. I snapped the lock behind me and headed toward the sheriff's cruiser, idling at the curb, the quilt's fringe brushing my ankles. Sheriff Ramirez stood by his vehicle, hat in hand, the badge on his chest catching a glint of dawn. "Morning, Ms. Quinn," he said quietly. "Sorry to drag you out so early, but we got a tip." He nodded toward the side gate, and I saw yellow crime scene tape fluttering in the breeze as deputies photographed fresh footprints leading to the basement door. "Our night vision cameras caught another visitor after midnight," he explained. "This one left a little, gift." He gestured toward a tarp-covered area near the camellia grove. My pulse quickened as I followed him across the yard. Under the tarp lay a shattered planter and a handful of paint cans, bright red paint splattered on the porch railings. The quilt bag, even the music box perched on the bookcase inside. It was a message: defile the symbols of my home, and you'll see how much you can lose. I clenched my jaw, tasting the bitterness of violation, but I also felt something steely harden inside me. They might wreck my possessions, but they couldn't destroy my resolve. I rubbed my palms against my jeans and met the sheriff's eyes. "Who would do this?" I asked. He shook his head. "That's what we're sorting out. Could be the same person who broke the camellia, could be a copycat. But given recent events," he paused, and the implication hung between us, James. I squared my shoulders. "I want full protection," I said. "Cameras repositioned, patrols increased. I'm not living under siege." Ramirez nodded. "You'll have it. We'll keep you posted." He tipped his hat and walked back to his cruiser, leaving me standing in the wreckage of color against green grass. I took a deep breath and let my gaze travel across the yard, the broken planter, the spray-painted porch, the hackneyed threat. Then I saw the camellia bush, its scarred branch now staked upright, surrounded by fresh blooms, petals bright and defiant. It struck me that each round of attack only made what remained more precious. I squared my jaw and turned back toward the house, the quilt gathering in my arms like a living banner. Inside, I changed into work clothes, rugged jeans, and a t-shirt, and gathered my toolkit. After the sheriff left, I didn't want to hide. I wanted to repair. I spent the morning scrubbing red paint from the porch railing using old towels and a bucket of soapy water. Each swipe revealed the honey-toned wood beneath, like uncovering the truth under layers of lies. I sanded the splotches, wiped down surfaces, and repainted the battered planter with a fresh coat of white, then tucked a new camellia sapling at its base. Every action felt like a protest, a declaration that I would not be intimidated. Neighbors paused to watch. Maria held out a jug of lemonade, and Anna from the book club appeared with a plate of muffins, offering smiles of solidarity. Their presence buoyed me like sunshine breaking through clouds. By noon, the porch looked nearly whole again, streak-free fresh blossoms swaying in the breeze, and I felt my chest fill with satisfaction. But I knew the reprieve would be short. That night's trespass had escalated the stakes. I climbed the porch steps, the quilt draped over my shoulders like a cloak, and looked out at the grove. The newly planted trees, each stake labeled with a scholarship recipient's name, seemed to lean toward me as if in support. I whispered, "We're in this together," and stepped inside to prep lunch. While I chopped vegetables and stirred sauce, my mind churned over plans for final security upgrades. Stronger locks, motion sensors in the basement, a neighborhood watch rota. I flipped through Alice's journal for guidance. Her entries about building a safe space for herself and others resonated more than ever. In her neat handwriting, she'd recounted installing new locks after a break-in at Patricia's workshop. She'd written, "I refuse to live in fear. I will secure my sanctuary." I closed the book, heart pounding with the realization that I wasn't just preserving a house. I was continuing Alice's legacy of resilience. I finished cooking and plated a simple lunch, then carried it out to the porch, setting it on the small wrought iron table beside the music box. The lullaby trilled softly as I wrapped my fingers around the warm bowl. Normally, I'd worry about trespassing wouldn't sit in plain sight with so many threats unresolved, but today I felt shielded by purpose. As I ate, I watched a steady stream of neighbors walking by. Some waved, some paused to talk scholarship details. Others gave friendly nods. In their eyes, I saw trust and appreciation. That community was my true fortress. My home was no longer just a physical space. It was a network of shared stories and mutual support. Late in the afternoon, I stowed the toolkit and drove to the Pasadena Independent for a meeting with a reporter who'd covered the probate hearing. The editor's name was Carla Hughes, a tough-fare journalist known for digging into social justice stories. I'd invited her to write about the scholarship fund the Phoenix Grove planting and the personal journey of a 62-year-old teacher rebuilding after loss. When I arrived, her photographer was shooting B-roll of the Camellia Grove as sunlight flecked through leaves. Carla greeted me with a firm handshake and led me to a back office. "Linda," she said, flipping open her notebook, "your story is compelling, but there's more than just a family feud here. You're tapping into larger issues: ageism, displacement, the power of community." She paused, then asked, "What do you want readers to take away?" I leaned forward and met her gaze. That it's never too late to start over, that women, especially older women, are too often written off. But we have strength, wisdom, and the right to our own lives. And when we support each other, we create real change. Carla nodded, scribbling furiously. We talked scholarship criteria, community events, and my plan to host a Second Bloom seminar series in the library where I'd once been invisible. By the end, she promised a front-page feature, Resilience in Bloom: How One Woman Turned Inheritance into Empowerment. On my way home, I pictured the article a steady wind at my back, lending momentum to everything I'd built. But as I turned onto Craftsman Avenue, headlights glared from behind a parked black sedan. My stomach clenched. The car stayed facing me as I pulled into my driveway. The engine idled for several seconds, then sped off before I could make out the driver. A chill skittered across my skin. This was no prank. It was surveillance. Someone was watching me. I climbed out of the Prius and stood beneath the arching orange branches, the music box nestled in my bag. The quilt was back inside, still draped over the bookcase. I thought of Alice's journal. She'd endured suspicion and scrutiny, but she'd never hidden. I squared my shoulders and entered the house, shutting the door firmly behind me. Inside, the sunset light shimmered through windows, painting walls gold. I set the bowl of still warm soup on the kitchen counter and exhaled. Safe for now, yet more vulnerable than ever. That evening, I lay in bed listening to the hush of the neighborhood settling. But sleep eluded me. The threat had evolved: vandalism, trespass, now covert surveillance. I reached for the music box on my nightstand, wound it once and let the lullaby fill the dark. It felt like a promise that beauty and sanctuary could endure. I opened the journal and found a scrap of paper tucked between the pages. A poem Alice had written decades ago. Bloom where you are planted, even if the soil is hard. My eyes stung as I whispered the line into the night. I closed the journal, stood, and walked to the window overlooking the grove. Moonlight silvered the leaves, and I saw movement just at the edge of my vision. My pulse spiked. I strained to see, but it was gone. Had I imagined it? I checked the time: 2:14 a.m. The doorbell rang twice. My heart thundered. I didn't know whether to run or answer. Every instinct told me this was a risk. Could be James, could be a deputy with evidence, could be someone else testing my resolve. I opened the door a crack, peering out. No one stood on the porch, but a single envelope lay on the welcome mat, sealed with red wax bearing the same A+P monogram I'd seen on Marcus's envelope. My breath caught. I knelt and picked up the letter, heart pounding so loud I wondered if the neighbors could hear it. The envelope felt thick, weighty, like a parcel of secrets. I closed the door and flicked on the porch light, the beam cutting through darkness to illuminate the wax seal. My hands trembled as I broke the seal and extracted the folded parchment inside. The words were in Aunt Alice's handwriting to Linda. If you are reading this, you have proven stronger than I could ever dream. But the greatest challenge remains protecting what you love from those who fear it. Trust no one but yourself and those who've shown their hearts. My chest tightened at the warning. I read it again, line by line. Then I heard a car engine starting down the street, engines of passage or pursuit. I knew one thing for certain: tomorrow I would have to choose between opening my doors wider to allies, to family, to potential threats, or fortifying them completely, sealing off all but the truest friends. As the music box lullaby played softly in my mind, I realized I was standing at the threshold of the final test. Would my sanctuary become a fortress or a home? And as the engine's hum faded into the night, I whispered to the dark, "I'm ready." But even as I said it, doubt flickered. Was I? At dawn, I'd find out, but for now, the wax-sealed promise burned in my hands, and I stayed rooted on the porch, listening for the next move in this game of shadows and trust.